Here we're going to look at a computer manufacturing example like the one we did previously, where we had only two models, basic and XP, but here we have 8 different models. And this example 3.2 is in page 100, and the file name is Ch03-product mix 2. So here there are a couple of more differences. Not only that we have more models, then we have assembly labor, then the testing we have 2 different lines. We can use either of those 2 lines for the second step. So first step is assembly, and after assembly you can either use line 1 testing or line 2 testing. So let's color code the input, and I'm going to put an underline here for emphasis. Okay. Now this is labor hours needed for assembly. Then if you send after assembly to line 1, these are the hours that will be needed for testing. And instead, if you send the products to line 2, then these are the hours that we will need for testing. And then we have cost of components, and then we have the selling price. So these are the inputs. So let me color code them. Okay. Now I'm going to include 2 more rows here so we can calculate the cost separately and then do the unit margin. For that, I'm going to highlight 2 rows, and under home we can go to insert and insert sheet rows. Okay. So now these are already color coded, so let's clear the color code because we're going to be computing. So here again under home you can go and clear all. So this is cost of computer per unit, and we'll call that line 1, and cost of computer line 2. So, and let's give names here. So we have labor hours needed, okay, times cost of assembly labor, okay, plus cost of testing in line 1, hours of testing in line 1, times cost of testing labor hour per labor hour. Okay. Now that is the cost of labor plus cost of component parts. So cost of labor plus component part for line 1. So now we need to do the same thing for line 2. Labor hours needed, cost of labor per hour for assembly, plus now this time we have to use labor hours needed in line 2 times cost of labor per hour of line 2 plus component parts. Now, these 2 can be copied across. So those are the different costs. And then selling price. Okay, selling price can be absolute referenced. Okay, row is fixed, column is not. So be $13 minus cost per unit for line 1. Okay. Now if we copy that down, so that will be the margin for line 2. Okay, let's put a couple of decimal places there. Copy, and you get the profit margin per unit in whichever line the product gets produced. Okay. So now here is a production plan. Okay, again, I'm going to put a border line for emphasis, and how much we're going to produce using line 1 and how many units we're going to produce using line 2. They both are decision variables now. So how many units of model 1 in line 1, how many units of model 1 in line 2, and same for each of the 8 models. If you sum the two, that will give us the total that we will produce of each of the models, and that has to be less than or equal to the maximum sales allowed. So these are the maximum sales allowed, that's input, and this is the total that we'll be producing in each of the 2 lines. So that total should be less than or equal to the maximum sales allowed. Now hours available, so here are the hours available for assembly and line 1 and line 2. So that's input. Now hours used is going to be, okay, so let's give names here for these 2 and that as well. Control click will highlight non-contiguous regions. Okay, and then we need to give names for these 3 rows as well. So assembly would be some product of number tested, number of models produced, so an assembly labor needed will be some product of the total production. So that is the total production and labor hours for assembly. So that will give us the total labor we will use in assembly. And for production in line 1, testing, so that is the number of models we will be producing in line 1, and labor for testing in line 1. So that's the amount of labor we will use in line 1, and we do a sum product with the second line production quantity and second line labor needed per unit. So that will give us the hours used. So these should be less than or equal to the hours available. And then the profit. Profit will be how many units we will make using line 1 times the unit margin for line 1. Now that can be copied down and across. So that will give us the individual margins, and then we have to sum, and we can use auto sum. So that will sum the profits of models produced in line 1, and then that's line 2. Then we sum the 2 total margins, and that's the objective to maximize. Color code that, and then we say maximize. So now let's name hours used and hours available. Okay, so now we have the model set up. Next is to use solver to find the solution. Okay, before we go to solver, let me do a couple of more formatting things to emphasize. I put border lines. Okay, so now go to data, solver, So now that's your total profit that we want to maximize. And changing cells is how many units we're going to produce of the 8 models in each of the 2 lines. Constraints are the total production of each of the models should be less than or equal to the maximum sales possible. That's one. And hours used should be less than or equal to hours available. That's the second. Then we need to make sure that this is non-negative, and we use simplex LP and we solve and make sure that we have found a solution. Now we're going to do a solver table. Okay, so now we want one-way table here. What the table that we want is for assembly hours available. So that is assembly labor available. We have 20,000 right now. We want to do sensitivity for 18,000 to 25,000 in increment of 1,000 hours. And we want the production, total production, what we want. Total production, come the profit. Remember, you have to do control click. Click OK. And we have the different assembly hours input. Okay. And then the production of the 8 different models and the profit. And you can generate graphs for each of the output variables from here. So when you examine, you see that you always produce 1,500 units of the first model. You never produce model 2 and model 8. And you produce always 1,000 units of model 6. And then the others we have varying amounts depending upon the availability of labor hours.